Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for our Climate Change, a Family Conversation. My name is LaRae Hauser. I'm the director for Imagination Station. And as many of you may know, the Science Center closed right at the beginning of this pandemic. Our team has been working very hard, still delivering, but in this virtual world that we've been living in, we miss so much hearing the laughter and the voices of families and kids coming into the Science Center. And soon we'll be reopening on May 28th. So very excited about that. But we're also still continuing with virtual experiences and here tonight to engage with you on a very important topic, climate change. It affects all of us. It can be a very scary and complex topic for adults, let alone talking to your children about it. And tonight, I think we hope you walk away with maybe two things, a better understanding, as well as a useful tool in dialoguing with your children. Because I think it'll be important for all of us to understand, not scare anyone, but understand what is happening and how I can maybe make a difference, each and every one of us, for where we live and breathe. Tonight, we're joined with a friend of the Science Center, a familiar face and voice that you will all recognize. Christina Williams will be our host and moderating us through us. She is the weekend anchor for WTVG 13 ABC, as well as an Emmy-nominated reporter with them. She is a friend of ours, a mother, a family member in the community that we live in, and very much an advocate for our whole community. I'm thrilled that she was be here in person tonight with us, and that she still wants to come back and work with us as many Imagine It segments she's done and the Tests of Science experiences. So it's very nice to have her. I hope you enjoy this conversation that we're beginning tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, Christina Williams.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Lori, for those kind words. I am so happy to be with all of you tonight, whether that be at your kitchen table, outside on your porch, or maybe in your family room. Thanks so much for joining us for this important conversation. I hope you have a chance to learn something tonight, take away something from this conversation, and maybe consider some action steps for your family. Before we get started, we have some wonderful guests for you tonight, but I would like to talk about our sponsor first. We want to give a big thank you to the Lyda Hill Foundation in partnership with the Association of Science and Technology Centers for making tonight's event possible. Now, Lyda Hill is the If Then initiative, and it's committed to inspiring the next generation of girls to pursue careers in STEM. We hear a lot about that term. Now, the two women that will be speaking tonight are If Then ambassadors. So I will briefly introduce you to them, and then we will have a chance to answer some of your questions. Okay, it's going to be a fun night. Let's get started. Well, first, we want to introduce you to Shaila Raghav. She is a Conservation International leading expert on climate change and drives the organization's climate change strategy to really protect and maximize nature's potential as a climate solution. Shaila's one of the youngest and one of the few minority women out there at the forefront of the movement here in the US. She led the development of the carbon calculator as a way to give consumers the power to fight climate change in their personal lives. She also plays an integral role in the negotiations on the Paris Agreement that was signed by 195 countries and has influenced climate policy for over a decade.
My name is Shaila Raghav. I'm the Vice President of Climate Change at Conservation International, which is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. I work on drawing attention to the fact that we can't solve climate change without nature. I use STEM in my job every single day. Well, it may not seem that I do. I actually work on international negotiations for climate change. So I was involved in negotiating the Paris Agreement, which was adopted back in 2015, which was the world's first global agreement on climate change. But I use science and STEM every single day in trying to communicate the facts, communicate why climate change is important, communicate why it's important to countries around the world. But more importantly, make sure that the policies that we adopt and the policies that we create at the international level respect what the science tells us, which we know that we have to be at net zero emissions by 2050. That means that we have to be 100% renewable energy, that our cars need to be electric. That's what the science tells us, and our policies should reflect that science. So my job is really to help communicate the facts in a way that decision makers can act on those facts.
Well, Dr. Kimberly Miner is also joining us tonight. She is a climate scientist with NASA and the University of Maine and focuses on risk assessment and system dynamics. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, Kimberly works with the international teams on the Arctic Methane Project, looking at the impacts of climate change in the Arctic. She's also a research assistant professor at the University of Maine, looking at the global risks from climate change. She's a fellow at the Center for Climate and Security and the co-chair of the NASA Interagency Forum on Climate Risks, Impacts, and Adaptation.
So my name is Dr. Kimberly Rain Miner, and I look at climate change and all the different ways that it can impact our lives now and in the future. So I love the natural world, and I've always had a really great time hiking and boating and playing around in the mountains and the forests. And so when I found out that it's threatened by climate change, I really wanted to work hard to make sure we can preserve all the species that we currently have. I get to come up with new and interesting ideas for where we should go and what we should research. I get to ask questions and then go look for the answers. The best part about my job is going out and seeing the wonderful way that the world is put together. So even though sometimes we think of scientists working in a lab, I get to go on crazy adventures that are exciting and sometimes dangerous. So I work with people all over the world, in Switzerland, in Canada, even in Antarctica. I also work with people at NASA and the Park Service, and we all look for solutions for climate change and work to understand how it's going to impact our lives better.
So a big welcome to both Shyla and Kimberly. We are so excited to have you here tonight. As we talked about, this is a conversation. This is a chance for you to learn something and ask some questions. So hopefully we all have a discussion about climate change. We know climate change is happening. We know human activity is responsible for the Earth's temperature rising. And in turn, that has some negative effects out there. So ladies, thank you so much for being here tonight. We have a bunch of panelists and questions that are coming in from children who are joining this conversation. So let's get started. Our first question is from Catherine, who is 6.
My name is Catherine Harrigan, and I am 6, and I want to know what is climate change.
Well, that's a great way to kick things off, Catherine. So what is climate change? Let's start broad. And, Shyla, I'd like you to answer this question. Let's start here and get an idea of where we are before we move on.
Oh, thank you so much for that question, Catherine. So climate change is a change that is usually gradual, and it's a change to the usual weather that we would expect in a place. So for example, in a certain city, you might expect a certain amount of rain, or you might expect a certain amount of temperature, hot or cold. And when you add up all of the small changes in weather day after day, year after year, and you look at the long-term pattern, that's climate change. So you can begin to actually see some of these changes in our own lifetime. So for example, when I was a kid here in California, where I grew up, it would rain a lot in the winter, but now you see very less rain. It's a drizzle, when normally when I was a child, you would have seen more of a downpour. And when you add up these changes over the course of many years, that's what climate change reflects. It's the pattern of small weather changes. And these changes can be gradual, so they can be incremental year after year, or they can actually be more extreme. So they could actually manifest or show up as extreme events like storms or floods as well. And like you said, these changes are brought about by human activity. And the reason is because the combustion of fossil fuels, so when we burn the gas that we put in our cars, or we burn coal to produce our electricity, this causes the emission of a gas called carbon dioxide, which, as it accumulates in our atmosphere, among other greenhouse gases, makes it warmer over time, which then causes these gradual changes in weather on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thanks, Shyla. I appreciate that. So that gives us a brief overview, and I know that's a lot to take in. Maybe you have a little one sitting next to you. You might need to go back and explain this again. But we have a lot of questions tonight to get through, and this might give you a better idea of where we are and where we're going. Our next question is from Kaylee, age 10. She wrote in and said, what do you do in your job to help with climate change? Now, Dr. Miner, I'm going to give this one to you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for the question, Kaylee. So one of the things that I do is I look at all the different ways that things are changing and I write them down and I make note of them, and we take pictures and we take samples of the soil and the snow and the rain so that we can get an idea of how things are changing, like Shiloh was talking about, over time. I also look for pollution. So things like plastic in a place that it shouldn't be. Maybe your plastic should be in your Tupperware drawer, but it ends up in the ocean. So we have to make sure that things stay where they need to be, whether it's fossil fuel emissions like carbon dioxide, they should be in the ground, or whether it's plastic that should be in your Tupperware drawer. So this research has taken me all over the world. I've gone to the North Pole, where Santa may or may not live, and the South Pole, where the penguins live, and Mount Everest and the Alps, and all over the world, you can see these changes happening, whether it's less snow or different amounts of snow in the mountains, or like Shiloh was saying, just a change of rain over time. But the difference is that it's happening in our lifetime, as opposed to these really long time periods, like thousands of years, which is what we're used to in Earth's changes.
Dr. Miner, thank you. So you might be watching and going, okay, what comes next? Amelia, age 9, has a question.
How can we help stop climate change?
That might have been what we were all wondering. So how can we help? Maybe we're not able to travel to the North or the South Pole and do some of that research, but what can we be doing here on a daily basis? The families that are joining us tonight, how can they help out? Shyla?
Yeah, that's such an incredible question. Thank you, Amelia, for asking it. The first thing I would say is that to all of the children listening, it's not your responsibility or your job to bear the entire burden of solving climate change that we're seeing today. The climate change of today is really a consequence or a result of the past 100 or 200 years of activity. And to a large extent, it's the responsibility of adults and people that are leading countries, that are leading companies, that are managing how we plan cities, to really do a better job of responding to the science and doing what we know needs to be done. But that doesn't mean that you are powerless. You have an incredible amount of power to unleash your talent, to unleash your voice, to help contribute to solving the climate crisis. So this could mean talking about climate change more, discussing it with your friends, making sure that your parents know that you care about the future of this planet and that they have a responsibility to you to steward our natural resources on this planet as well. Think about ways that you can use your talent, whatever it might be. Design, if you're good at public speaking, if you're good at math or science, there's something that you can do to help create the technology of the future that will reduce our dependence on what's causing climate change. Another thing that I work on a lot is stopping deforestation. There's also a relationship and a connection between our forests and climate change as well. So if we also protect our planet, protect trees, protect natural resources and all of the wildlife, that will go such a long way in confronting the climate crisis as well.
All right, thanks, Shyla. And that really ties into our next question here from Lexi.
Hi, I'm Lexi from New York City, and I have a question. What will happen if climate change? What will happen to the Earth if climate change keeps happening for thousands of years?
A lot of us might be wondering about that one. Dr. Miner, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question, Lexi. Really good question. So it kind of depends on where you are. So if we keep having climate change, let's just say for the next 200 years, because thousands of years is actually a really long time, you might see flooding in coastal areas where you were able to build houses before. There might be some areas that get drier and some areas that get wetter, or maybe just really big rainstorms happen and cause flooding out of the blue. So there's lots of different things that could change, but overall, we're thinking that things are going to be getting gradually warmer. So you'll see maybe less snow, fewer glaciers, more ice melting, and that also means that sea levels could rise. So coastal cities might have less beach than they did before, or the piers that have carousels on them, their water might be a little bit higher. And then over time, those challenges can become problems and get worse and worse and worse as ecosystems change. And it impacts everything around us, but specifically it impacts humans because we live in these areas. And if our house is on the coast, and then suddenly the coast is closer, it makes it really hard for us to stay in our house. So that's one of the big concerns, is the way that things are changing and making it hard for people. While at the same time, we're also thinking about the way it's making it hard for forests, like Shiloh was talking about, or birds, or small animals. And we're trying to protect all of these different folks living in areas that might be impacted by climate change over time.
And as we talk about all of those different types of animals, Dr. Miner, you mentioned the fact that as we see some of the glaciers start to melt, this ties into our next question. This one was a write-in from Amaya, age 12. She says, I've seen a lot about the polar bears in the Arctic and how they're losing their habitat. So what can I do? What can she do? Yes, you heard correctly, to protect the polar bears and other animals that are at risk because of climate change. And I know you said, Shyla, that this doesn't necessarily fall on the children, but is there anything that any of us can do, whether it be in Toledo, or Northwest Ohio, Southeast Michigan, or anywhere around the globe? What can we do?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. In terms of polar bears, I mean, polar bears have really become an iconic symbol of climate change because they live in cold places that are experiencing very extreme warming. And polar bears are losing their habitat. That's really just fundamentally what's happening, and they're losing their food source or access to their food source. And that's why we're concerned about the future survival of that species. But it's not just polar bears. There's plants that potentially won't be able to grow if it's hotter, or certain animals that won't be able to move if the conditions remove their food source. So it's really a lot of types of wildlife that are going to be affected by climate change. And in terms of what we can do about it, I think that the first thing is just making sure that we're not putting additional pressure on natural ecosystems, because when we destroy or deforest or encroach into natural or wild areas, it makes it harder for the species that live in those areas to adapt as climate changes. So I think really ensuring that we're putting an importance on conserving wild and protected areas, restoring those places so that they can continue to house the vast biodiversity of this planet, but then also more urgently acting on climate change so that the impact and the severity of climate change doesn't become worse over time and make it even harder for these for wildlife to survive in the future.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next one comes from Leon, age 6.
Is climate change melting glaciers?
So Dr. Miner, you touched on this before. Can you expand?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, Leon. And as you can kind of see behind me, I've got a picture that a friend painted of us camping on a glacier. And then right above, that's the biggest glacier in the Alps. And there's an observatory and a chocolate factory on top of it, so that you can eat chocolate on top of the highest glacier in the Alps. So unfortunately, climate change is melting glaciers, because glaciers are just basically really thick ice and snow, and they are subject to the heat from the atmosphere. So as the atmosphere gets warmer, even if it's just gradual or over time, that ice is going to melt. Just like if you leave an ice cube out on your counter, it may not feel like the house is really hot to you, but that ice cube will start to melt and create a puddle of water around it. Now, one of the big problems with this is that glaciers store our extra water. So just like the ice in your freezer, if you were to run out of water in your house, you have that extra ice that you can put in a glass. And it may not taste good, but you can drink that if you need to in an emergency. So that's the same way for glaciers. We use glaciers all over the world as an extra water source. And in the spring and summer, when they melt during normal thaw processes, they supply agricultural and households with water that they can use all summer long, maybe when there's not very much rain. So there's a concern that if all the glaciers start to melt more and more and more and go away, we might not have that extra water that's really important for plants and animals and humans all over the world in the summer. So just like Shyla was talking about, it's really important for us to deal with climate change just as quickly as we can and end our reliance on fossil fuels just as quickly as we can so that we can help slow down some of the melting in glaciers and some of the ecosystem change that polar bears and others are dealing with.
Well, that was a great way to explain that, especially to a lot of our younger families that might be watching. The ice cube is a really great way to really understand what might be happening. I know that we've covered a lot. I know that these topics are heavy, and we want to make sure that we're also inspiring you and maybe leaving you with some information that says, hey, there is something that I can do, or I feel inspired to use your talents, Shyla, like you mentioned. So I want to ask both of you ladies one more question, if you will. This one was not from a child, but we just want to know what inspires you each and every day to keep working on the issue of climate change. And I'll have you go first, Shyla.
Yeah, thanks for that question. For me, I think climate change is just the way that the planet is speaking to us. It's the planet telling us that we're doing something that is affecting our Mother Earth. And so for me, what inspires me is the opportunity that we have to listen to our planet, to restore our connection with where we come from the planet that supports all humans to live. It gives us clean air, clean water, all the food that we eat. So really having the opportunity to find the connection between nature and climate change is what inspires me and gives me the chance to really value and appreciate and have this gratitude for the planet that we have and the responsibility that we all share to save our planet.
Yeah, I really agree with everything that Shyla said. Really well put. I want to add that for myself, I go outside and hike and bike and boat just as much as I can. And sometimes it helps me feel a lot better to do things like grow a garden and eat from my own garden, or to plant trees. Last year, my partner and I planted 180 trees that just showed up in our backyard, and we transplanted them in a wetlands. So there's lots of different fun things that I can do that not necessarily is going to totally change climate change, but it's going to help a little bit. And it's going to help improve my local ecosystem. And it's going to help bring pollinators to my yard or give animals a home. And that's the kind of thing that I like to do to remind myself that I can make a difference, even if it's a small difference, by enriching the world around me. Also, things that we've been doing in California recently is planting native flowers for bees to eat and hummingbirds to eat from. So there's a lot of really fun ways to interact with the environment that's actually beneficial as well.
Well, thank you, ladies, both so much for giving us your time tonight. I hope for everybody watching, you had a chance to have some questions answered. Maybe you learned a little something and you are inspired to do something small, even if it is planting some native flowers this summer in your own backyard. So thank you, ladies, both so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it, Dr. Miner and Shyla Raghav. Now, from there, before we go, we want to also talk to you about what's happening right here in our area. And we have something special for you tonight involving Metroparks Toledo. We're going to watch a video explaining the prescribed burns that are happening out at oak openings in that region and in the metro parks. And what they do is they use those to maintain and then restore that whole region out there. In fact, if you drive by from time to time, you might actually see them doing this. And then Imagination Station's Education Director, Sloan Eberly Mann, will speak with LaRae Sprow, the Natural Resources Supervisor at Metroparks, and she's going to explain her work and how she became interested in environmental science.
The oak openings region is completely dependent on disturbance processes. You really have to make sure these disturbance processes exist so that it can thrive over time. One of the main processes is prescribed fire.
So the unit that we're going to be burning is called Mary Savannah.
My name is LaRae Sprow. I'm Natural Resources Supervisor with Metroparks Toledo.
Get all of the equipment that we need, and we're going to go to ignition point 1.
There are things about Northwest Ohio that even growing up, I didn't realize how incredibly special they were. We have black swamp habitat, and then the oak openings region, we have just this cross section in just Lucas County of so many different types of habitats. There are some people, especially with a lot of the wildfire issues that they're having out west, where people think that we could have some sort of wildfire effect with our burns, and that's really not possible. We just don't have the climate. We have so much moisture. Our fires are done really safely. There are very, very specific weather parameters that have to exist in order for us to use prescribed burning. I try to do as much prescribed fire as we safely can do. Any prairie, oak savanna, oak woodland, basically it's one of those habitats where you can't just leave it alone. A lot of people think, well, aren't there other things that you can do that would essentially do the same thing, such as mowing? The mowing doesn't really do the same thing to the soils that the fire does. The fire makes nutrients readily available for different kinds of plants. The other thing that it does, which seems like it would be a negative, is it actually makes our soils less nutrient rich. But in the oak openings region, a lot of those plants thrive on those soils. So you actually want to create these soils. So I think a lot of people feel like the only reason we use prescribed fire is to control our invasive plants, and that's a component of it, but a lot of it is protecting and enhancing that plant community type in general. When I first started working at Metroparks, we were really protecting the most high quality remnants of the oak openings region. As our natural resources division started to grow, we started to do restoration at more of a landscape scale. So it wasn't just little pockets of diversity. We were connecting those pockets of diversity. Creating that connectivity for wildlife is really, really critical in any kind of system like what we have, which is highly fragmented, like roads, different landowners. So to see that landscape scale connectivity of restoration has been really, really rewarding. We take it very seriously that these are natural resources that we steward. We're not just looking at one species, we're looking at the entire system and biodiversity as a whole. Having a park within 5 miles of every person in Lucas County, it's a huge asset for our community. There's a lot that we can do, not only to protect those resources, but then also to educate other people on things that we all can do to protect those resources too.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sloan Mann. I'm the Education Director here at Imagination Station, and I'm so excited. I'm joined with LaRae Sprow. She's the Natural Resource Supervisor for Metroparks Toledo, and she was featured in that awesome video that we just saw about prescribed burns. So hello, LaRae.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you doing today?
Good, good.
So tell us a little bit about how you developed your interest in working for the parks and your background in environmental science.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of young people and young adults for sure, when I went to college, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I liked to work with my hands. I knew that I was very active, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then I took an environmental science 101 class. And so that I grew up on a farm, so I had a lot of connection with just nature and kind of science in general, but I didn't really have that global connection. So when I started taking that environmental science 101, it really gave me that global perspective of our environment and a sustainable future. And so I was really excited about that. And then I started, diving into our biology classes, and I really just absorbed as many internships as I could get to kind of hone in on what I really like. Where did I want to take this? So I did a lot of internships, and those internships are really what got me out into the field, right? And got into our park systems in the area, and really, seeing kind of what was out there. And so once I started doing that, that's when I really realized this is what I want to do. I love habitat restoration because it makes me feel really connected to the world and to everything that we have here. So it gave me that real understanding of how we're all connected, and how our region is connected to the water, and how the Great Lakes are connected to the world. And so that was kind of my that's how I got here, I guess.
That's wonderful. And that video that we showed previously was a lot about connecting and protecting the ecosystem in oak openings and using prescribed burns as a means to do that. But I'm sure every day you're not doing prescribed burns. What does your day-to-day really look like?
So a lot of what we do is, we're, like I said, we're trying to, we're really restoring these habitats. So a lot of the habitats that we have are very degraded. I focus most of my energy in the oak openings region, which are globally, we have 5 different globally rare habitats in the oak openings region. So a lot of my energy is focused in that region, and doing what we can to increase the biodiversity. And again, like the video said, that connectivity. So species can't survive if they can't be connected. So creating that connectivity so that these species can thrive, and the habitats in general can actually thrive. So it's a lot of invasive species control. It's probably one of the main threats to our region, and most habitats are invasive species. So we do a lot of that type of control. We also just do a lot of enhancements by introducing native seeds, so that some of the plant populations that are dwindling can thrive again. And then the prescribed burning is a big part of that too.
That's awesome. And for anyone that hasn't visited the oak openings region, that's a trip that you definitely want to take. It's beautiful. So what do you enjoy most about your job?
So I'm part of, I guess, what I, just enjoying waking up and going to my job every day.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing, right? What I am, I guess I enjoy most that creating, knowing that I'm protecting something that is globally significant, and knowing that we have that in Toledo. We have that in the Toledo area, but I think just all over our globe, you can find something in your backyard that's worth protecting. So just knowing that we're protecting, that I'm helping with that protection. I think I love doing prescribed burns. I can't, it's something that I actually enjoy because I enjoy the team. It's not just because I enjoy the teamwork of, us as a team really working together and being able to do a lot of habitat restoration in a relatively short period of time. And I know how important prescribed burning is to the oak openings region. One of the other things that I love about working in this field is just all of the partnerships that we have, knowing that it's not one single organization or one single person. We're all working together to protect the region. And it's really fun working with a lot of different people, a lot of really smart people, people and smart people.
That's wonderful. And, Metroparks Toledo is such an asset for our community. And, that awesome goal of having a park for everyone within 5 miles of their home so that everyone has access to the beauty and nature that are the Metro Parks. But you're the expert. What's your favorite or most recommended spot in the Metro Parks to visit?
My favorite spot is definitely the Girdham Road sand dunes. So on Girdham Road, we have a sand dunes. It's attached to our Red Trail Savannah. But it's one of the areas where you can see that really, really deep sand that makes the Oak Openings region the Oak Openings region. I would recommend it to anyone that goes to Oak Openings to definitely visit the Girdham sand dunes. It's also the first place where I had a restoration project where I was, expanding an area. So it was really my first restoration project with the Metro Parks. So because of that, I have my own little, tugs at my heartstrings because of that too.
That's wonderful. I've never even heard of that. So I'm excited to go visit that myself. Thanks for sharing. Is there anything else you want to share with our families that are watching tonight?
Just, I definitely think that, exploring nature is an important part of our lives. And I would encourage anyone, you can go to your Metro Parks or any park and you can do it in your backyard. Just explore nature because it really connects us as people and it connects our globe. It makes us understand how both fragile our earth is, but also how resilient it is. So the resiliency of the earth is, something that we should also embrace.
Awesome. And that's a great message to end on. Thank you so much, LaRae. We appreciate your time. And thanks to all of you for watching.
Thank you.
And that concludes our conversation about climate change. Climate Change, a family conversation, is a chance for you to learn a little bit more about what's happening out there. So as I said before, tonight, I hope you learned a little bit of something. Maybe you had a question answered that you've been wondering about, and perhaps this is sparking something new within your own family. There are some basic things that you can do to help our planet. And a special thank you to Shyla Rogov, LaRae Sprow, and Dr. Kimberly Miner for giving us your time this evening. I'm Christina Williams from 13 ABC. Thanks for watching.